Dear Greta Thunberg, just when we thought your anti-Israel shenanigans had passed, you were back at it again yesterday, this time accusing Israel of genocide and war crimes in The Guardian. These completely baseless claims only show us, the slightly more educated in the crowd, that your 5-year hiatus from primary school left you with neither studious vocabulary nor the ability to use a dictionary. What a shame. Although you're now 20 years old and the recipient of a brand new high school diploma, it appears you're still the child who reads from scripts and can't have a respectable conversation about the issues you speak on. After 5 years in the spotlight, we thought you'd bring at least a little more than feel-good nothingness to the table by now. Ironically, this reminds us of the Palestinians you're suddenly so supportive of, so I guess it sort of makes sense that you're naively aligning yourself with them. Perhaps you missed the part in school where the Palestinians continue to fail in fighting an intellectual, facts-based war, so they manipulate children like yourself into concealing their increasingly shady past and incessantly corrupt leadership. Using children, both dead and alive, might soften the Palestinian image, but when the stakes are so high, with a topic such as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we cannot afford to play silly games and pretend that children are actually smarter than adults. Rather, we must be responsible and look at the source of the number you mentioned yesterday. More than 15,000 people, of whom at least 6,000 are children. Quote, Israel has reportedly killed in the Gaza Strip, unquote. On one hand, we want to commend you for properly using the word reportedly, a word used to indeed express one's belief that the information given is not necessarily true. However, your emphasis on and architecture of the words Israel has reportedly killed, yeah, that's literally the definition of fake news. Israel hasn't killed anyone other than despicable terrorists, for which we make no apologies. It is true that people have unfortunately died during the Israel-Hamas war, a war that Hamas in fact started. But there's a stark difference between Israel deliberately killing people, as you recklessly purported, and people dying as a tragic side effect of war. We would say you should know better, but then again, you only received a high school diploma at the age of 20, just a few months ago. Among those of us who finished school when we were supposed to, we learned how to differentiate between credible and phony sources. The only source of the numbers you highlighted, 15,000 people, of whom at least 6,000 are children, is a terror organization called Hamas, the same organization that encouraged its men to behead babies, sexually assault women, and burn families to death during their October 7th attacks in Israel, the same organization that drugged civilian hostages before their release, with a tranquilizer called clonazepam, the date rape drug, so they would appear smiling and calm as they were handed over to the Red Cross, and the same organization that claims in its charter that the day of judgment will not come until the Muslims fight and kill the Jews, and that women should be the quote-unquote maker of men. But differentiating between credible and phony sources is actually the easy part. We adults also have the more difficult task of identifying solutions. Unsurprisingly, your scant article published yesterday in The Guardian, a whiny 10 paragraphs that you and 2 other people supposedly wrote, didn't suggest a single solution. It seems that people are, also unsurprisingly, using you for hollow virtue signaling and banal messaging. The idea that there's a sensible connection between climate justice and the Palestinians or Gaza is incredibly ridiculous to an infinite degree. Apparently, though, whoever is behind you knows very well how this game is played, dumbing down convoluted, nuanced topics, ignoring historical context, and hysterical people screaming through megaphones, "Won't somebody please think of the children?" In Israel, we love children. It's one of the reasons why Israeli women have more children on average than most of their peers across the world. It's also why every Israeli parent sincerely hopes that our country's security situation will be such that their children won't need to be drafted into the military. In Gaza, comparatively, your Hamas buddies encourage their people to have more children in order to, quote, create a larger army. Yasser Arafat, the terrorist who led so-called Palestinian liberation for 3.5 decades, described the womb of the Arab woman as the Palestinians' quote, strongest weapon. At schools, mosques, and summer camps, Children in Gaza are taught to hate and kill Jews. But sure, stand with Gaza, why don't you? Meanwhile, on October 7th, dozens of Israeli children were barbarically murdered and kidnapped by Palestinians. What did you have to say about these souls? I'm only asking because you wrote yesterday that, as fellow humans, we have a responsibility to speak out. In this age of identity politics, the person who conveys a message is more important than the message itself, but neither you nor your message do anything for anyone. We would recommend that you stay in your lane of climate change, but even there you failed to affect any semblance of significant change. To borrow from one of your instant classic quotes, how dare you? If you really seek to save the planet, it's time to grow up and think, like an adult, about realistic solutions rooted in history and context. Instead of posting tweets and Instagram photos, no less writing 10 measly paragraphs in The Guardian, a notoriously anti-Semitic publication. In one of these paragraphs, you mentioned that everyone has a responsibility to distinguish between Hamas, Muslims, and Palestinians, and between the State of Israel, Jewish people, and Israelis. First of all, please keep the State of Israel, the Jewish people, and Israelis out of your mouth. You know nothing about us, and we don't desire to be one of your lame attempts at standing in solidarity with all affected civilians. Second, a 2022 survey by an esteemed Palestinian pollster told us loud and clear, more than 70%, 7 out of 10 Palestinians, are in favor of more terrorism against Israel, and believe Hamas isn't committing enough armed resistance against the Jewish state. In school, this is called statistics. You might want to revisit it. Also in the Guardian piece, you noted that we are now seeing a sharp increase in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and that you unreservedly condemn all forms of discrimination. But all you've been doing since the Israel-Hamas war started is engaging in Jew-hating microaggressions. You mean to tell us that in the pro-Palestine photo you posted on Instagram, you just coincidentally included a blue octopus, one similar to a Nazi German cartoon, depicting the Jews as a blue octopus encircling the globe, as you were seated next to someone who claims to be a Jew? What's more, you only mention anti-Semitism when it's in the same sentence as Islamophobia, which is another way of saying, Jewish discrimination isn't worthy enough of being highlighted on its own. And when, after Hamas initiated this mess by attacking Israel and Israeli civilians, you wait weeks to proclaim there is no climate justice without human rights, what you are really telling us is, human rights are undeserving of your platform when Palestinians purposely murder, in the cruelest of ways, Israeli civilians. Only when Israel responds to defend itself is something deserving of your platform. Gotcha. You know, Greta, it was interesting to read that, like you, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and Iranian Supreme Leader Ruhollah Khomeini were awarded Time magazine's Person of the Year. The four of you now have something pungent in common. But since you probably haven't learned who these people are, consider asking your parents for a quick history lesson. Yours truly, Israel and the Jewish people.